It's officially October, which means that it is officially spooky season. And in honor of spooky season, we're going to talk about one of the spookiest things that happens in a lot of our lives, which is being ghosted. And if there's anything that I know all too well from being a single 20-something-year-old living in New York City, it's being ghosted. So on today's podcast episode, we're going to talk all about that, as well as spill the tea on my dating life and some of the lessons that I've learned about myself and who I am from dating. What's up, and welcome to the That's So Rich podcast, the show that's redefining wealth and helping you manifest a life that is rich in every single way. I'm your host, Kat Kozad, transformation coach, manifestation expert, and spiritual guide. And together, we're going to create your happiest, healthiest, and wealthiest life. I'm so happy you're here. Let's do this thing. Oh my gosh, guys, I have literally never talked about my love life on the podcast before. So low-key, this is a little spooky for me. Again, in honor of spooky season, we're talking about spooky things because I have just never shared this part of myself on the internet before, and I don't know if I really will after this podcast episode, but I just feel as though it's something that's so relevant and so real for a lot of people, whether this be in romantic relationships, platonic relationships, career, whatever it may be, is this whole ghosting thing. And I honestly can't speak to ghosting prior to this generation because obviously this is the one that I'm born and raised into. But the rise of ghosting that I've experienced, and I don't know if that's just New York City based, and I have some theories and some things that I'll talk about inside of this podcast episode, but it just feels like it's more and more. And the amount of women that I talk to that have been ghosted also, it just seems like it's running rampant at the moment. So, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about my love life, dating in New York City, and the theories that I have on ghosting, or my experience of what I see through myself and through all of the women that I've coached surrounding ghosting. And the truth is that I've never really talked about my love life on the podcast before for two reasons. One being that I was in a fairly toxic situationship for a really long time. I started talking to somebody back in 2016 and was on and off with him, never actually in a real relationship, but he was a major, major part of my life from 2016 to 2022, end of 2022, and actually just finally cut real ties with him this year completely. And during that time, I just didn't want to talk about any of it because it felt really embarrassing, honestly, and I didn't really understand what was happening inside of it that could bring value to all of you. And I'll go a little bit more in depth on that. But second reason is because I have one of the most major limiting beliefs and like past experiences, traumas that I've had to work through. And this is something that I've very, very clearly seen and have been able to talk about, especially with my mom, because this is something that both of us have done and like her entire family lineage has done, is pretended like everything's cool, calm, collected on the outside, when in reality there is a different experience, and almost portraying like this mask or this image of something being a certain way when in reality it's not exactly like that. And so that's not to say that like I've been saying that my love life is perfect and all of these things. It's just that I haven't even talked about it because romantic relationships, aside from my relationship to my body, romantic relationships have been the area of life that have been the most challenging for me. And yeah, we're going to dive into a bit of that in today's podcast episode, but that's essentially why I just haven't talked about it, because I have had this fear, and I wouldn't say it's been a fear as of recently. It's just been something like, why would I even need to talk about that? Because there's nothing that I do that's directly related to it. with sharing about my love life, sharing about my experiences inside of the different like beliefs and traumas and things that I've had to work through surrounding all of it. But ultimately, I just didn't want to share this part of myself because it's messy. It's really fucking messy. And it's always been really fucking messy. So with that being said, I don't need to like go all the way back with all of my love life because that would be a long, long, long list of boys that I've had crushes on and who didn't like me back and all kinds of weird experiences. But essentially, when it comes to romantic relationships, we typically seek out subconsciously what we are wanting or what we experienced from our childhood dynamic. So I've talked about this on the podcast for myself that I have and had a challenging relationship with my dad. I really didn't feel like my dad was there a ton growing up. He was physically there a lot of the time, but mentally and emotionally he wasn't. And I always inherently felt like there was something wrong with me. And if there wasn't something wrong with me, I would have received more love and attention from him. And as I grew up, I developed what lots of people like to call daddy issues, where I would seek validation in older men and I would seek validation in men, period, through all kinds of sorts of acts, whether that be sexual or otherwise. And I didn't realize it at the time, but all of this felt very like self-degrading. And the lack of worth that I felt inside of myself when I wasn't being validated by a man in some sort of capacity was so huge that I ultimately would find myself in this really toxic cycle where I would do anything and everything that I could to get into some sort of man's life that I had feelings for or that I was interested in, and do literally anything for their attention, do anything for their love. And this very like desperate energy oftentimes either attracted emotionally avoidant men or guys who would just try to push me away because I was a lot. And that's not to say that like it's bad to be a lot, but I was a lot in a place of wounding. It wasn't me just owning myself. It was a lot in this way of like, I am projecting all of my trauma and all of my insecurities onto you, and I want you to fix them for me because I don't know how to fix them myself. And so in that dynamic, when I would attract like nice guys, I wasn't attracted to them because they were just giving me what I wanted. And I ultimately felt like if I wasn't earning it, then I wasn't worthy of the love or attention that I was getting from the men that I was interested in. And so all of that to say, I've found myself in relationships that really weren't that supportive to me. And prior to doing the healing work, I have only been in 2 relationships and 1 situationship. And first relationship I thought was like the love of my life. I was so in love with him. He was so in love with me, but he was in a really bad position in his life where he was addicted to drugs and alcohol and didn't want to take me down the path that he was on at that time, and ended up ghosting me to end that relationship, which took me 2+ years to heal from. And I don't hold any sadness or resentment for him anymore. I wish him nothing but the best. And I actually have so much love for him because he set me on a path that I feel as though I wouldn't have been on otherwise. But beyond that, I had a really sweet boyfriend before I moved to New York City. We just wanted very, very different things. He wanted a small, simple, quiet life in rural Colorado, and I wanted the hustle, the bustle, the excitement of New York City. And I think more so than anything, he liked the idea of me more than he actually liked me. And I think that I don't know if I actually really liked him. More so, I liked the attention and I liked being important to somebody. And then I had a multiple year situationship where we were very hot and cold, very toxic, very very, very nasty to each other. But when we were good to each other, we were really good to each other. And it's so interesting because looking back at that situationship with this person, I'm so grateful that it happened regardless of how painful and how truly toxic it was, because this has been one of the biggest mirrors that has reflected back all of the insecurities and traumas and things that I was holding on to from my relationship with my dad, that being in this relationship or in this situationship with this man really just brought so intensely to the surface in a way that I turned into a version of myself that I never even recognized, even outside of like when I was drinking, or even outside of these moments where I felt like I completely was not in my right mind. A lot of the experiences that I had with him where I would like turn into a screaming, crying mess, or I would be manipulative, or I would lie about something, or whatever it was, just to try and get what I wanted out of the dynamic, was the biggest mirror for me. And in the multiple years of us being on and off again with each other, I really saw the pattern starting to change, because this is a man who was in my life prior to starting my healing journey. And from when I first got into this situation with him to the very end of it, which our final communication was just a few months ago, there was a completely different way that I went from reacting to responding to him. At the very beginning, it was very reactive. It was very fiery. It was very toxic. It was just like shit that I'm like, oh my God, Kat, I didn't even know that that could like live and exist inside of you, to going through this like really genuine healing process of me being able to get more and more honest with myself in what I'm actually looking for in a partner, what I'm willing to tolerate, how I expect somebody to treat me, all of these different things, to then at the end being very clear within my communication of I am no longer willing to have you in my life. And that's not because I think you're a bad person, but I think it's because we genuinely can't be in each other's lives in a positive way. And so I'm letting you know that I'm ending the communication, and I would love for you to respect that. But if you can't respect that, I will be blocking you. And unfortunately, we did have to block him. But with all of that being said, although that situation with this man wasn't the most supportive thing for me, it actually is one of the greatest learning lessons in terms of what I'm willing to tolerate, what I'm not willing to tolerate, and what I genuinely want in a partner. And in the time since ending things with him back in 2022 till now, and actually just cutting off full communication with him this year, I've continued to date greater and greater guys. The coolest thing in raising the standards and learning these different lessons that I've had through the situationships as well as dating here in New York City, and I'll go into that in just a moment, is that no matter how many times I put myself out there and it doesn't end up aligning in the way that I wanted to, I do notice that I am getting closer and closer and closer to what it is that I want in a partner and the kind of dynamic that I desire to have in a life partner. And that just gives me full faith and hope in the fact that like the law of attraction is real, that the healing work that I talk about here on the podcast is so real, that your energy really does attract the kind of people that you're supposed to have in your circle into your life. And so I think that relationships, specifically romantic relationships, can be one of the greatest indicators of where you're at on your healing journey, depending on who you're attracting into your life and the different dynamics that you call in. And I know specifically for me, that's a huge one, because even in my like astrological chart, one of the biggest things in my lifetime is being able to heal the relationship with relationships and with other people. And so continually seeing not only on a romantic level, but also on a platonic level, the kind of people that I'm attracting into my life now versus before doing the healing work is so insanely different, and such a reflection of the fact that what you experience on the inside is going to be mirrored back to you in your external reality. And that's due to the universal law of correspondence. Your internal world dictates what you're going to experience in your external world. And so if you focus on the internal world, you really will have a different experience on the external. With that being said, like I was talking about at the very, very beginning of this podcast, and like the title of it says, we're talking about ghosting here today. One of the things that I've seen time and time again in New York City specifically is that ghosting is the most common thing. Two big reasons for that being, one, that New York City, it's really interesting. It attracts a lot of emotionally avoidant people, which means that if you're unfamiliar with attachment theory, there is a few different attachment styles. There's an anxious attachment, avoidant attachment style, secure attachment style, and then anxious avoidant. And there's a few other ways that these are presented in different like psychological studies or books, so on and so forth. So you may have heard them addressed in a different way. But New York City, it attracts a lot of emotionally avoidant people because there tends to be a correlation between emotionally avoidant people and success, because they're really used to being able to move on to like what is the next best thing. And when it comes to this city as a whole, I believe there's so many people who are go-getters making shit happen and have had to really be in this strong mentality of, okay, I'm moving on, I'm doing the next best thing, I'm moving forward, what else can I pursue, put my energy into, so on and so forth. And they oftentimes have a hard time detaching that from just working and creating success and finances and all of these different external things, and then applying it to their personal relationships and specifically romantic relationships. So there are a lot of emotionally avoidant people in the city. That's true anywhere in the world, though. I'm just speaking from my personal experience because, of course, I live here in New York. But second thing with that, and this is the thing that I really want to dive into and talk about when it comes to ghosting, is that people who ghost don't want to meet something inside of themselves, and being in a relationship or in conversation with you brings something so deeply uncomfortable inside of themselves up to the surface that they would rather ghost you and walk away and not have to confront it than they are having to look at it. So I'm going to say that again in a different way. So in my experience of dating, I have been ghosted more times than I can even count. And the reason I believe that this is true is because I've done such deep work on myself that I am so willing to look at all of the discomfort, all of the shadows, all of the darkness, all of the pain, all of these different things. And that can be really, really intimidating to somebody else who hasn't done the same thing, because my light shines onto the parts of them that they're still uncomfortable with, that they haven't faced yet, that they know subconsciously or even consciously that they would have to face in order to be in a relationship with me. And that's been super interesting because, like I was talking about earlier on in the show, I had this belief at a really young age that something was inherently wrong with me. And so as I've been in the adult world, dating, doing all of these different things, and being ghosted by men that I'm actually really interested in, I've had that wound that I was talking about earlier on in the show of believing that I was inherently flawed and that something was wrong with me. Otherwise, my dad would have showed up differently, would have loved me better, so on and so forth, come up to the surface over and over and over again, because that's the thing about our wounds, that's the thing about our limiting beliefs, is they're going to continue to be re-triggered and triggered and triggered until we actually choose to heal them. That's what our soul does with these triggers. Anytime they come up to the surface, it's not because they're true, it's because your soul is asking you to heal them. And so in this relationship or in these different dynamics with dating, being ghosted has brought that wound of, you're not good enough, Kat. if you were, then this wouldn't happen. If you were different, if you weren't inherently flawed, if you were skinnier, if you were prettier, if you were smarter, if you didn't have a successful business, if you didn't make as much money, so on and so forth, then these men wouldn't ghost you. And that's simply not the truth. The truth is that somebody who ghosts is more scared of confronting something inside of themselves, some sort of deep discomfort, whether it be something that you trigger inside of them or something that they're just already experiencing that they are not willing to face, so they ghost you instead. They leave you high and dry, they just disappear. And that's been one of the most challenging things for me to learn in this whole process of dating, is that it's not always you, especially as somebody, like I talk about here on the podcast, of taking personal responsibility for everything. That was so hard for me to not look at people who have ghosted me and being like, wow, I actually am the problem. Like, if I was being ghosted this many times by this many guys, then that obviously means that like I'm flawed, I'm fucked up, there's something deeply wrong with me, as opposed to really recognizing that with the amount of work that I've done, I do shine really brightly. And that is very intimidating for a lot of people. There was actually a TikTok that I found the other day. I'm going to pause really quick and find it so I can read it to y'all. Okay, I found it, but now the building's vacuum in the hallway is running, so you might hear the vacuum, and also all the sirens are fucking going wild. So apologies for all the noises. Y'all should know by now, living in New York City, loud, but that's okay. Okay, so this is what this TikTok said, and I was just like, oh, this is it. They're not running away from you. They're running away from the person that they would have to be in order to be with you. That's it when it comes to ghosting. And I want to talk about this again outside of just the romantic context. This is if you ghost people. This is if somebody reaches out to you, whether it be for a job opportunity or a Instagram message or a friendship or whatever it may be. If you notice that you are ghosting somebody, there's something inside of you that you are running away from. There's something inside of you that you are so uncomfortable with that it feels easier to ghost this person than it is to address that discomfort inside of yourself. And the longer that you avoid that discomfort inside of yourself, the more that you are actually prisoner to it, as opposed to having this uncomfortable moment of addressing that person or that experience in whatever way needs to be addressed so that you can actually be released from that discomfort. What we resist persists. So when you experience that discomfort of having to confront somebody or say no to something or speak your truth on something, and you choose to ghost instead, you're not freeing yourself from it whatsoever. You're actually just prolonging the experience of it, and you're going to experience another familiar pattern or cycle that happens where you're going to be brought to the same sort of situation, whether it be, again, romantically or otherwise, where you have to address it so that you can break that cycle of discomfort inside of yourself. Because again, your soul is taking you down the path to try and help you heal. So when you're not healing by ghosting something, then you're going to continue to have the same patterns play out over and over and over again until you address whatever that discomfort is in terms of confrontation so that you can move forward from it. And as somebody who used to ghost, when I was talking about the situationship that I was in, one of the things that kept that situationship going for so long was the fact that both of us would ghost each other from time to time. I ended up ghosting him probably like 3-4 times over the span of however many years we talked to each other. He ghosted me 1 or 2. And in that experience of ghosting him, there was nothing that I was actually getting from it. I was just running away from myself. I was running away from myself until I actually got to the place where I was able to clearly communicate that my boundaries were being crossed, or that I had these boundaries in the first place, and that if they were crossed, that I was no longer going to be in communication with him. And once I actually then addressed that discomfort was no longer inside of me. And something that is very, very important to me is that I refuse to ghost anybody. I do not and will not ghost anybody because I know that that's just a reflection of me not facing something inside of myself. So even if I have the urge to want to ghost somebody, whether that be, again, business related and or romantically, I refuse to do it because I know that there is something inside of myself that needs to be addressed. And the longer that I push it off, the longer that I'm going to be prisoner to that discomfort inside of myself. And I want to be the freest version of myself that I can be. And that can only come through choosing to address those things. It's having an uncomfortable moment so that you can have a long-term experience of satisfaction, as opposed to having short-term satisfaction by ghosting somebody, but having long-term discomfort. You have a choice always. It can be the short-term satisfaction with long-term discomfort, or short-term discomfort with long-term satisfaction. And I can imagine if you're listening to this podcast, you really want it to be the latter. You want to have long-term satisfaction, and that's where you are required to meet that discomfort inside of yourself so that you are no longer repeating these patterns of having it be, whether it be ghosting or anything else that's bringing up that discomfort inside of you. And one of the biggest things that we talk about on the podcast is creating this life full of freedom. And this is where true freedom is actually experienced, because what we experience on the internal, like I've been talking about, is mirrored into our external circumstances. So if you're avoiding this internal discomfort of confronting somebody or setting boundaries or saying no or whatever it may be, to protect that sense of discomfort that you would feel in that moment, then you can't expect to have a life full of freedom, because you're not advocating for your freedom by doing that. When you want time freedom, location freedom, financial freedom, freedom in mind, body, and soul, it requires you to face the discomfort that you're experiencing so that you can actually get to that freedom, because you won't get there without facing the blocks that are standing in the way of it. So this all roots back to, again, ghosting. If you're ghosting, you can ghost yourself. This isn't just people ghosting you or you ghosting people. You can ghost yourself. And when you ghost yourself, when you avoid yourself, you're abandoning yourself. And the longer that you abandon yourself, the longer you hold yourself back from what you want as well. So all of this to say, it's okay. It's okay if you've been there. It's okay if you've ghosted. It's okay if you've been ghosted. Ultimately, the goal is to get to the discomfort. Whatever that discomfort is that makes you want to run away from it, whether that be a person or your own experience, your finances. We ghost our fucking money all the time. Ghost anything in our lives. If you're ghosting that thing, then that is what you want to look at. That's what you actually want to run head first towards, because in that experience of facing the discomfort, you break the cycle. And we are here to break the cycle on the That's So Rich podcast and any sort of corner of the internet that is mine. We are breaking cycles. We are no longer settling for life experiences that are less than what you want, because if we're talking about redefining wealth on the That's So Rich podcast, that's how you do it. Wealth is a life that you feel free inside of yourself. You feel free inside of your mind because you have brought yourself to the places that you would otherwise want to run from. You've sat with the discomfort and you've moved through to the other side. There's nothing more rich than facing the things that you don't want to face, because what awaits you on the other side of facing them is greater than anything that you currently have. So, whether it be ghosting yourself or others, whether it be being ghosted and facing the discomfort associated to that, know that you're safe to do it. You're safe to do it. I've done it. Like I said, I used to ghost a ton of people. I'm still being ghosted. We'll figure that one out soon, and I'll keep you guys updated on when there's actually a breakthrough surrounding being ghosted. But I believe that it's all here as an experience to help us grow. Also, I want to say one last thing on being ghosted by other people. I'm a firm believer, and this is something that I'm very clear on for myself. I don't like to date just to date. I don't find a lot of pleasure in that. I date for marriage and I date for something serious. And I have very clearly stated to God, the divine source spirit, whatever you want to call it, I've stated to God that I don't even want to waste my time with a man if he is not my husband. So I think it's very divinely orchestrated as well that I find myself in these positions where I'm having conversations and going on dates and starting to get to know these different men, and then am either ghosted or, I mean, I'm not ghosted every single time. I also want to clarify that. I'm not ghosted by every single man that I talk to. And also a lot of the men that I've met, it's been mutually not wanting to continue to pursue, or I've communicated that I'm not interested in them. I'm kind of making it sound like every single guy that I talk to, I get ghosted. I don't. It's not all the time. It's definitely been a lot, but I also have gone on a lot of dates. But I'm very clear on the fact that I don't want to invest all of my time, energy, and effort into somebody if it's not the person that I want to actually ultimately like build a life with. And I've been very clear with God on that. And so I think that if you're in tune with your spirituality, with your faith, and you've had that conversation with God or the universe as well, where it's like, okay, I'm ready for my person, then know that anybody who comes into your life that ultimately lets you down in some sort of capacity or ghosts you or is not a fit for you, it can be really easy for us to get frustrated about that and feel like something's wrong or that you're not being led to your right person. But you're actually being divinely led to the right person in every single experience, and you're getting something from it, even if it doesn't feel like the lesson that you wanted to learn. It's all just lessons. It's all just raising the energetic standard, changing the beliefs, the perspectives, so that you can be in perfect alignment with what is meant for you when you are meant to receive it. And so yeah, I'm excited for it. I've said this to a lot of my clients. I'm sure I've said it on the podcast before, but my like biggest dream, biggest like vision that I have for myself and for my life is to be a wife and to be a mom someday. I'm really grateful that I have this beautiful business that impacts so many people, and I know that I'll always have it and be creative in some sort of capacity. But my biggest dream since I've been a little girl is to be a wife and a mom. So I'm excited to keep y'all updated, and I am really grateful that the messy dating experiences that I was having that I shared earlier on in the podcast, I've healed so much of that, where now it really is a lot more just like sweet, nice conversations, experiences with the men that I meet that just ultimately aren't the right people. It's not the spooky, toxic shit that it once was, because that was rough. But I know that so many people really relate to that, and that's something that I hear and get to help so many of the women that I work with through, is that you get to raise the standard of who you want to have be a part of your life, but it really starts with you facing the discomfort of not raising those standards or not advocating or confronting in the way that you want to and need to for yourself to be able to put yourself into energetic alignment with greater things. So all of that is what I have for you on today's podcast episode, kind of all over the place, but that's a little bit about my love life. That's a little bit about the healing that I've done to raise my standard and attract much more high value men. That's what I want for myself ultimately. And that is my theory on ghosts and ghosting. And if you are ghosting, ultimately like what you can do so that you can break that cycle and no longer hold yourself essentially prisoner to the discomfort that you're experiencing inside of yourself, and really free yourself so that you can live a happier, healthier, more fulfilling, and free life. I'm sending you all of my love, and I will chat with you on the next podcast episode.